Thank you for coming. Will everyone please rise while the Graduate Center? Thank you. Can we all be seated? Our opening prayer will be offered by Elisa Bushman.
Dear kind and gracious Heavenly Father, we thank Thee so very much for all the many things that Thou hast done for us. Father, we thank Thee at this time for helping us be able to pull this experience off, and we ask Thee to please bless everyone that's in attendance to be able to understand the message that we are trying to give. And please bless that people will be motivated to make a difference and to love their brothers and sisters more. Father, we thank Thee so very much for all that Thou hast given us, and we ask Thee to please help us to be able to give more to others and to be able to see the value in others. And we say these things in the name of Thy beloved Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you all for coming tonight. My name is Bybee, and I'm one of the organizers of the BYU Alternative Commencement. And I know that I can speak for all of us when I say that I am overwhelmed. We are overwhelmed and grateful that so many have showed up in support of us and of alternative ideas. In planning this event, a lot of people have asked me why. Why an alternative commencement? Why the McKay Event Center? Why Pete Ashdown, Jack Healey, and Nader? And the short answer, I'll leave the longer answer to Ashley. She's going to talk after me. Is that we want to do something constructive. We felt like there was enough of dissent, enough of partisanship, enough of strident language in the political discourse in our society right now. We wanted to do something different and unique. We wanted to invite people to speak, and share ideas about an alternative vision for our country. And that's why we're gathered here tonight. There are many ways of I guess, telling this, kind of the backstory of how this event came to happen. I think that one of the most effective ways is to do it through numbers, and so that's how I'm going to tell it. 25. That's the number of people who planned and coordinated this event using basic grassroots mobilization. 25 students. 10 was the number of days that we essentially had to plan and coordinate this event. 15 is the number of meetings we held in a crowded Provo living rooms. We emailed and called thousands. We felt the support of many of those thousands. 24, the number of places that we called in Provo that told us they would not allow us to host this event or that they were booked. 100, the number of finals that our group took while we planned this event. As a side note, I took 3 yesterday. 10,000, the number of flyers we printed and passed out from hand to hand that in order to promote this event. $20,000, the amount of money we estimated this event would cost. $900, the amount of money I spent out of pocket for this event. $26,000, the amount of money this event that we actually raised for this event in 9 days. $11,000, that's the amount of money that we raised in 4 hours one day for an online post. A lot of people said that we couldn't do this or that we shouldn't do this. We've received ridicule, threats, we've been called names. Many people have laughed and jeered, but here we are. Nearly 1,000. That's the combined total of people who joined us on online groups and signed petitions to attend this event and in support of our cause. 4,000. That's the number of people who signed a national petition in dissent to the decision to invite Dick Cheney to speak at Commencement. That same 1,000, nearly 1,000 BYU students who signed themselves up online in support of this event, those same names were all put on a massive do not hire list by Provo companies and businesses as a result of their support of this alternative commencement. Yeah. $6,000. That's the amount of money that we're now able, because of the generosity of people like you and those around the nation, to donate to local charities, including the Jean and Charlotte England Education Fund, who's kind enough to let us use their bank account to do it. Throughout college, I felt that the power of ideas is immense. This idea was big. It was powerful. And frankly, there were many times when I didn't know if we would be able to accomplish it. But there's some other, I guess, more powerful numbers that I'd like to share with you. 3 is the number of nationally renowned speakers you will hear from tonight. As you know, Pete Ashdown, Jack Healey, and Ralph Nader. 25,000, that's the number of miles that Pete Ashdown drove when he ran for Senate in the state of Utah to talk to ordinary Utahns about their concerns. Over 2 million, the number of people who belong to Amnesty International, the group that Jack Healey headed the American portion of for 12 years. And finally, hundreds upon hundreds of thousands. Those are the lives that have been affected by the work of Ralph Nader in promoting car safety and clean air and safe workplaces. That's all the numbers I have. Thank you for being here. I'm inspired and touched by your presence. Thank you.
I would add to Eric's numbers one number, which is the number of trash cans that Adam Barlow stood on to announce to the testing center that this was going on today. It's my favorite number. I want to talk for a minute about the philosophical reasons why I personally have done this and why I think several other people have done this and why you maybe have chosen to attend this event. A lot of people have asked me, just like they asked Eric, if you disagree with what BYU or the government does, why don't you just go someplace else? A favorite suggested location is Berkeley. I only know one way to answer them, which is to tell them that I love this place and I want it to be what it can be. After I answer this, there is always another question. If you love it, why do you critique it? My answer is the same, because I love it. And because I believe that integrity requires a mix of staying and going, charity and chastisement. And because I want to go to a school that lets me do all of the above. I'm an English major, and so I've taken the liberty of choosing the most dangerous word in the English language, which is integrity. I think it is the most dangerous word because it is one of the few words that require us to critique everything and everyone equally, including ourselves. So I'm here today at Commencement to defend an endangered word and to save a place for it in our political and academic dictionary. I am certain that integrity requires great vision and great compassion, but I fear that these virtues are often poor friends. It is tempting for people with great vision to leave the places that need them most, and it is tempting for compassionate people to accept places as they are. I believe that integrity is an ambivalent condition, and a person earning it believes painfully that people are good and places are good, but that both can also be much better. This kind of person has two kinds of vision, one that sees the beauty in what is, and another that sees a beautiful urgency in what could be, the scrutiny of a seer and the prescience of a prophet. This compassion and urgency moves a person to critique herself and then critique institutions because she wants them to be as much as they promised that they would be. Integrity requires the creation of community, and that is what we see here today. Many of our churches, schools, and political parties are supposed to act like communities, but usually teach us only how to survive. They may keep us from the worst things, might get us some jobs, or repave a street. If they teach us much beyond that, it is usually a cruel kind of questioning, interrogation that includes and condemns everybody but ourselves. But if we love what is and what is possible, and if we feel equally responsible to both, then I believe we will start with questions for ourselves and our institutions, and our answers will not let us wait to be good. We won't be content to survive. We will want to change our surroundings by becoming whatever is missing. And we will not stop there and can't either. We will have to go further because we won't agree to the mere survival of anything. We will stay and build a community, a place where things we live for, art, expression, beauty, fairness, striving, and giving, will not be eclipsed by the things that get us there. We will stay on as creators and participators among other creators and participators, responsible for each other as we are and for what we could be. I think that any other kind of staying is less of a straight look around and more of a lingering look back or sideways, more salt pillars and less salt of the earth. Integrity isn't staying or going. Integrity is staying or going with all our might, without confusing the ugliness inside of us with the ugliness outside of us, and trying to fix both. Integrity is not about leaving, surviving, or even questioning, but about giving our abundance to the poverty that we see. Integrity is how you stay or how you go, and a generosity in both. But having vision means waking to an imperfect world. And what do we do with our dreams after that? Nothing good until we learn that loving and criticizing amidst imperfection, our own and others, is not a hassle on the way to the point, but the point itself. Knowing that integrity isn't just a question for cities, but a question for politics and religion and heart, a question we must say yes to alone and then yes to together. If there is heart left, I think it would be difficult for us to stop integrity at the limits of our own body. The body singular would always be the body politic, and all our acts would have a creative motion of bringing, improving, and togethering. But all is not well at BYU or in America if our fossilized feelings give us the righteousness of the already finished, the now to be endured, the soon to escape. It is not noble to survive, it is noble to create and revise. Integrity is not separation, and it is not the worship of a rhetorical fossil. Integrity requires the ripple of revision, reform, restoration, and recreation. It requires the sacrifice of superiority and the awakening of awe, and it reminds us that we should be stunned to be here at all, to be here with others, and to have something to give or something to restore. I believe that survival is an insult to human beings. I am told that people need food and water and shelter, and that is easy enough to believe. That is what people need. But humans need to create and to be responsible for something, to love it and give back to it. Humans want to participate, and if they are sincere, want to give themselves to whatever is missing around them. The above has been my philosophy and my burden, and it's been my answer also to the reason I have stayed at BYU and the reason that I'm helping to organize this alternative commencement. I believe that if we do not shut ourselves against the horror of the modern world, its poverty and its corruption and its cruel economy, we would feel compelled at all moments to be generous so that everyone could be equal. This generosity includes criticism, fundamentally includes it. Criticism is admitting that we are living without our eyes and considering it a surrender to live happily with what gouged them out. I am part of this commencement because I want people to have the chance to speak and to be challenged to speak better because they have had to listen to each other. My school and my country do not allow enough of this, and they hurt themselves for that. I believe that ordinary people know what is best for themselves, and I believe that organizations that won't agree to improvement from inside will be less vibrant, less fair, and less humane. This requires something, and I think what it requires is ethics in the present tense. And I think that as a nation and as a community, we are too comfortable with ethics in the past and future tense. We are comfortable with revolutionaries who no longer threaten us and with future people who will solve the problems that we aren't willing to solve. I think we need to learn as college students and as community members that change always occurs within a context of cyclical arguments, manufactured virtues, and reasons not to act and not to be shocked or horrified. I think if we learn that, we will be able to do the right thing even when a lot of things are ranged against us. And so we should get to work and spare no one our love, our help, or our ideas. And we should consider it an honor to work, to sweat for something, and to give a brave offering to the imperfection around us. Until we do this, we will live, for the most part, under what Berger has called the sacred canopy of the status quo. If we do not learn to live deliberately, to give a hard look to our institutions and assumptions, and to commend people who look, we will repeat history again and again. We will reinforce survival, unimaginative, task-oriented survival. We need to live looking around, deciding whether our institutions are doing what we designed them to do. Are our schools and our churches and our families places where we learn how to transform ourselves, where we are free to apply the lessons of history in the present, and where we are rewarded for thinking and not for merely obeying, where we can be creative and thoughtful and human? If they are not, and I don't think they are, then we are not finished. And I think we could start finishing by following W.H. Auden, who told it to me plain in a poem. There is no such thing as the state. We must love one another or die. And we could start by using our integrity the way it ought to be used, to evaluate ourselves and others equally and with love. Thank you for coming to this commencement. I hope that you agree with some of the reasons that we're having it, and I hope that as you listen to the speakers who speak, you will believe that there are alternatives that do not require violence, circular arguments, or privileging of one person over another. Thank you for coming.
It was the summer of last year when I first heard about Pete Ashdown, and I think I thought what most people think when they meet Pete Ashdown: this man is insane. It wasn't because he was running as a Democratic challenger in America's most conservative state to a man who had been in office nearly 3 decades. No, I thought he was nuts because of a small newspaper article I read that detailed the fundraisers both candidates had recently held. The same week, his opponent, Orrin Hatch, was hosting a $200 a plate fundraiser that ended up raising close to $500,000 for his personal war chest. Pete also hosted a fundraiser. Pete's fundraiser, however, was financed entirely out of his own pocket, with all proceeds going to help Utah's hungry and homeless instead of his own campaign. When any other politician in his position would have been desperately raising money for himself and probably resorting to dirty politics, Pete took the time to help those who needed it most. Despite my first impression, I ended up working for Pete Ashdown's campaign. I had the chance to work with him personally, and I was awestruck by his integrity, his energy, and his commitment to a new kind of politics. Using wiki technology, Pete has pioneered a way to connect citizens to democracy. He is an outspoken advocate for civil liberties and has continued to lead the fight in Utah for important progressive causes. For everyone who has ever felt like their voice wasn't heard or politicians were all just a bunch of crooks, Pete Ashdown offers a hope for the future, and where the opinions of everyday people matter and leaders care about doing the right thing, even if it might seem a bit crazy. Ladies and gentlemen, and the class of 2007, please welcome Pete Ashdown.
Thank you, Ashley. I have to tell you, during the campaign, some of you may have seen this, Chris Van Oker asked me which school was going to win the big game. And I was the only politician who gave him a straight answer. And I have to apologize because I said the other school. But it is clear to me tonight that BYU is the real winner. Even though I went to the University of Utah and my blood is red, my wife, my dear sweet wife Robin, went to BYU. And we coexist just fine. And that's what I want to talk to you about tonight. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall have mercy. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Not exactly Donald Rumsfeld or Dick Cheney stuff. Now, I confess I actually stole that last line, from Kurt Vonnegut. I hope I speak for all of you that I miss Kurt very much. My family's history is rooted in the great conflicts of the 20th century. I am fortunate that these conflicts did not prevent my family from having a history. My grandfather signed up for World War I and was selected for sniper duty, no doubt due to the amount of time sniping deer in the hills of bountiful Utah. His entire regiment was called up to be shipped out to France, but my grandfather fell ill with the flu. Because the scarlet fever was ravaging America and depleting troops that shipped out with the infection, his commanding officers decided that he would stay on base in California until he was well. This short illness saved his life. Nearly all of his regiment was wiped out in France, snipers primary amongst them. My mother was 10 years old when the Germans overran Denmark in a day. She would vividly recount to me as a child how the Nazi commanders rode horses into the gymnasium of her elementary school in a show of force, only to have them defecate on the floorboards. She, like many of her generation in Europe, held a deep-seated distrust of anything German for the rest of her life. My father was 16 when he wanted to join the Navy to fight the Japanese menace in World War II. He pleaded with my grandmother to sign the permission documents. She ended up signing these documents through her tears. At 16, he must have felt immortal because he requested submarine duty, one of the most dangerous jobs in the Navy. Yet my father, who has had 20/20 vision for most of his life, failed the eye test. He told me that the hand of God must have been on his shoulder. I think he was wrong, for it most definitely was in front of his eyes. Much to the dismay of an eager, immortal 16-year-old, he was placed on a supply ship in the Pacific that never saw any action for the remainder of the war. Throughout most of my childhood, an atomic mushroom cloud floated over my head. The Russians had their finger on the button, and Hollywood did a good job of painting the inevitable outcome to me on a regular basis. I caught the tail end of the ridiculous duck and cover and bomb shelter campaigns while I was in kindergarten. Although I believe these conflicts have little in common with the war we find ourselves in today, one thing remains the same. My grandfather and my parents were told by their governments that the people we were fighting were savage, inhumane animals who cared less for their own children than they cared for world domination. The enemy were not individuals, but hive-minded automatons who would fight to the very last man. Then some wonderful things happened to my family. My older brother was called on a mission to Japan. I struck up a lifelong friendship with a fellow computer geek in Germany. The Cold War ended, the Soviet Union collapsed, and now I count many of my former unknown enemies as my greatest friends. My brother eventually married a woman from Japan whom he met while studying at BYU. Her father witnessed the Hiroshima atomic bomb blast and lost a sister who was vaporized because she was standing on the train platform, unlike her other sister, who was standing beneath it. I had the good fortune to visit the Shimamoto family in Hiroshima and to be taken to the Peace Memorial that has been constructed on Ground Zero. If I can give you one piece of advice, graduates, and everyone here, and everyone listening, it is to visit this hallowed ground at least once in your lifetime. It is the most profound, moving sight I have ever seen. It changed me forever and convinced me to run for office. I have no doubt that a day at this memorial can motivate even the hardest heart to work for the abolition of nuclear weapons and for global peace. Peace between the United States and Japan, Germany, and even the former Soviet Union countries seems to be a natural fit now. It is incomprehensible that we would ever find reason to declare war on these former enemies. For we have trade, communication, and most importantly, an understanding of the people who were once as alien as another planet. I lament when I read Plato stating, "Only the dead have seen the end of war." Will Plato be interminably right until mankind blows out the candle of its own existence? I have but one hope, that if Plato had foreseen the internet, he wouldn't have been so pessimistic. Communication and trade are the foundations of the internet, but more importantly, communication and understanding are the foundations of peace. Today, insurgents, radicals, extremists, the ignorant, and the insane have turned war into an entrepreneurial sport. We can no more fight teenagers using bombs and cell phones with multi-billion-dollar aircraft carriers and the latest jets than we can fight mosquitoes with a shotgun. If the Iraq War has taught me anything, it is that our traditional methods of nation-state defense are currently useless against committed individuals. The inability to grasp this realization is what dates many politicians as dinosaurs in a modern world. It is said that if you fear death, you have a life worth living. The reverse is also true. If your life is worthless, you welcome death. This country must work with its allies to make life worth living for all on this planet, or we will face suicidal bombers and campus killers for the remainder of our existence. Today, I urge you to respond to the entrepreneurs of war by being an entrepreneur of peace. Try an experiment. Go to Google and search for Iranian blogs. You may be surprised by what you find. Reviews of American movies, love poems, cyclists going on European tours. Barely an anti-American rant in sight. Instead, a great admiration for our country's culture, and imagine this, a zest for the basic things of life outside politics. Then try this. Email an Iranian and strike up a conversation. Ask them about the weather. Then wonder if you've just been put on a government watch list in the land of the free and the home of the brave. I hate that feeling. In addition to exporting peace, work on it here at home. Find some common ground with your fellow Americans that you may disagree with politically. Respond to rhetoric with reason. Be open to changing your own mind. The best way to get rid of your enemies is to make them your friends. Service is an essential part of all our lives, all of our lives. Give back at every opportunity, not only when it is convenient. Through my involvement in Rotary, I have learned it costs $2,500 to bring clean water to a village, $20 to cure some forms of blindness, and $5 for a mosquito net that prevents the most common killer in Africa, malaria. How many hearts and minds could this country win with these cheap, life-saving implements rather than expensive machines of death bought on a payment plan? America should be a beacon for what is right with humanity, not a pulpit for ideology. Congratulations on your graduation. You have met a great challenge, and the best is yet to come. There is much work to be done, but I know you can do it. Every day, think about peace. Every day, think about service. Every day, believe that people can coexist no matter our cultural differences. Every day, question your political leaders, no matter what the party. And do not fear to speak your mind. This gathering is more than a response. This gathering is the future. We believe in being honest, true, chaste, benevolent, virtuous, and in doing good to all men. Indeed, we may say that we follow the admonition of Paul. We believe all things. We hope all things. We have endured many things, and we hope to be able to endure all things. If there is anything virtuous, lovely, or of good report, or praiseworthy, we seek after these things. Peace on earth is the most virtuous, lovely, praiseworthy goal I can imagine. I ask you to share it with me. Thank you.
We're now going to hear a song from our friend and fellow musician, Gabe Dominguez.
Can you guys hear that okay? All right. How you folks doing? My name is Gabe Dominguez. I play in a sustainable music project called Shake Your Peace. And right now I'm on a rock and roll bicycle tour of Utah. Started up in Logan on April 2nd, and it's ultimately going to be in St. George. I pushed the tour a week forward because the good folks who organized this event asked me to come play this song for you folks. It's my honor to be here. I have a pedal-powered sound system that we use at our shows, so what that means is I wheel my bike on the stage, and folks like yourself jump on it and pedal and produce electricity to power the sound. And I feel like there's two kinds of power in this world. There's the power that comes through brute force, and then there's the power that Gandhi talked about. He called it satyagraha, which means soul force. And what the pedal-powered amp is and what this auditorium is today is soul force. It's people power. And we're doing it ourselves and taking the power into our own hands. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I went to NYU my freshman year of college, and 2 weeks later, 9/11 happened down the street, and my classmates and I were running for our lives with our shirts over our mouths, trying not to breathe in the dust. And after that, I made it a point to go to all the anti-war protests. And this following song is a true story about what happened when I went out to protest the war in New York City. And whether you agree with my point of view or not, I think isn't as important as our ability to be able to talk about it freely and to feel the power in our own hands without having a club or a gun or anything like that, with just our bicycles, our harmonicas, our hugs, our kisses, and our alternative commencements.
I woke up today to protest the war. I grabbed my harmonica and ran out the door. Woo! I put feathers in my hair to protest the war. And I'm shaking my peace till my peace gets sore. I'm walking down the street to protest the war. Yeah, I'm walking like America's my freedom dance floor. Woo! I kissed my lovey to protest the war. And then I rolled down the grass hill by the grocery store. Why not? And we were screaming, whose streets are streets? I saw an old Jewish grandma getting beat. And then the cops, they jerked me off my feet. I only went out that day to protest the war, but whew, now I'm gasping for my freedom of speech. I didn't go to fight with the NYPD, but riot cuffs are on my wrists. They're making it a show. No. They're spraying mace into the crowd as they scream, let him go! And though their badges have eagles, they throw my feathers in the gutter. I say I can't feel my fingers, so they make the cuffs tighter. Then they take us all to jail and ask good terrorist hunting questions. Like, tell me who you voted for, son, in the last election. And don't you love America, son, and respect the freedom of speech, the Constitution, and its sections? And we were screaming, whose streets are streets? I saw an old Jewish grandma getting beat. And then you cops, you jerked me off my feet. I only went out that day to protest the war, but now I'm fighting for my freedom of speech. I didn't go to fight with the NYPD. So now I've got a new way to protest the war. So the NYPD redcoats don't put me behind bars again. Whose troops? Their troops. No, I'll tell you whose they are. Every activist and lefty who still drives a stinking car. So now I'm going to the beach to protest the war. Yeah, well, once upon a time, those dudes dumped the tea in the harbor. Remember? Yeah, we don't need their hammer now to build a new floor. Yeah, we're doing it ourselves. We're making salt on the shore. To protest the war. Thank you very much.
Gabe Dominguez, everybody, always bringing joy and beautiful music to the world. I'm here to introduce, though, Jack Healey, who is one of the world's most renowned human rights activists in the world, being a leader in moving human rights to an issue of widespread awareness, debate, and action in our world today. I don't have time to even begin talking about all the amazing things Jack Healey has done in his life. Every time I talk with him, I learn something new, and I find myself just completely amazed at his stories. From the humble beginnings of Pittsburgh, being the youngest of 11 children, he went on to help Martin Luther King plan the March on Washington in 1963. This wasn't his first March on Washington that he organized, though, and he continually worked fighting for civil rights and for peace in Vietnam as well. He was also the Peace Corps director in Lesotho in the 70s and 80s, using everything he could to fight against the brutal apartheid regime in South Africa. He was also the executive director of Amnesty International for 12 years, bringing this organization from a small and just multiplying it immensely until Amnesty is one of the world's most important organizations fighting for human rights in the world. Some of the things that he did in the 80s, he started having huge musical tours featuring musicians like Bono and Peter Gabriel, Sting, The Police, bringing to the youth and all people who could hear the message of the importance of freedom, justice, and human dignity. He started many programs that are still being used in all activist circles today. On top of all these endless projects, he has also founded the Human Rights Action Center because he believes so strongly in the power of grassroots movements. And I am eternally thankful for him in helping me and many others work for freedom and democracy in the country of Burma. Jack Healey represents to me a person full of humility and integrity and just having a beautiful outlook on the future. Please welcome him.
Hey, thanks. It's lovely to be back in your city and your college. I love the alternative thing because it unites your school with so many other people in the world that want an alternative to a labor union or to have another government or just addressed a little differently, and they pay a terrible price for it, are often killed and mauled and debased. The desire of a freedom people to speak to the world is not limited to the United States. The desire for freedom is so immense in the world that there's a growing river of consciousness that is so wide and deep that if we don't get in it and stay in it, we will step out of life itself. As a kid, I grew up in Pittsburgh. As mentioned, my mom lost her husband at 2, and I was 2 years old, and she raised 11 children. When I was a young person, 14 or 15, and a rough kid, kind of didn't know where I was going, I said to her one day, "Mom, when will I be a man?" And I'll never forget her answer. She stared me in the eye, stood in front of me, and said, "Jackie, will you learn to walk the highways and byways of life and to listen to the weeping and the wailing of the poor? Then, and only then, my son, will you be a man." We were going into Buenos Aires. We had toured the world with our musicians. We had succeeded everywhere we went. It was 16 countries in 6 weeks. We played before 1 million people, and things had gone very well. Our bus was pulling in to the stadium to celebrate with Argentina, 150,000 screaming people waiting for us. Our musicians were excited. Lo and behold, as we were getting off the bus, we had taken with us the grandmothers whose children had been stolen by the dirty military when they dropped them out of helicopters, and they stole those children, and we had restored them. The human rights movement had restored them to their grandparents because their parents had been killed. And lo and behold, at the bottom of the step of the bus was one of the policewomen waiting to steal back that child. And the child saw her, ran the length of our bus, and fell down behind the seat. We froze. We just froze. And then our little brother, who was probably 6, 7, or 8 years old, ran down to his sister and took off his little jacket, put it against the window of the policewoman. And I dare say to you, that is the human rights movement. That's all we got is the depth of our decency inside our heart to protect those we love. I was in a soccer field in Bosnia with a dean, young kid. Everybody's playing soccer, and I said, "Hey, Dean, why don't you go out there and play soccer? It's your game, you know. We Americans don't play that, but, you know, you play it well." The dean said, "No," and this went back and forth for a while. Finally, I said, "Hey, Dean, how come you don't want to play out there?" And he said, "I played soccer with my friends in our village, and I saw them rape my mother and my 2 sisters and kill my 2 brothers. I don't think I'll ever play soccer again." Then in El Salvador, as the military that we gave $1 million a week to was sweeping up through a village, poor village as always, striking and killing as they went, and a mother in the danger of her little baby, her little girl, said, "Stay on one side of this sheet and I'll stay on the other, and maybe one will survive." They struck that little girl with a machete as they exited out of the village. The captain who had done the killing heard a voice, went back to see what it was. It was that little girl singing a freedom song, 12 years old. Went back and struck her with that machete again. He exited, and he heard it again, and he went back and killed her. Class of '07, I want you to hear the voices of that singer. I want you to be able to hold Eldine in the night long after the torture and the killings have stopped. I want you to find a way to find your little jacket and put it against the oppression of any government that wants to hurt anybody in our time and in your lifetime. Real power, wonderful power, uniting power comes out of agreed documents. Our Constitution. When Dr. King marched in '63, and a lot of us seminarians, I was a Catholic seminarian at the time, heard his voice calling forth, if he did not have the Constitution and the Bill of Rights to bounce that basketball off, he had just been another minister who could speak well. But because the Constitution and the Bill of Rights that all men are created equal, all women are created equal, then we could move forward because he had something to rely on outside of himself. The people of the world have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They need it just like we need it here. For if you know ever what happens in a torture chamber to people, your eyes will cease seeing, your ears will cease hearing. The monstrosity of what goes on in a torture chamber is so dreadful that when our nation steps into that machinery of death, rendering soldiers and prisoners to other countries, you have to rally people. You have to awaken your nation and bring it back to its basic sense of decency that we do not kill. And why? Because we're a people of the Constitution. We're a people of the Bill of Rights. That failure falls on us as a people, as a citizen. And the courage that this class has shown, this college and this university, warms my heart that we're alive, we're well, and we're moving forward. And I want you to hear Ralph, so I'll close, but to the class of '07. I want you to hear me now and hear me well. Take your voices, and turn them into thunder. Take your candle and turn it into a bonfire. And revive this nation into what we say we are and what we want to be. God bless you, and thanks for having me.
We're going to hear another beautiful thing from our friend John Kovalenko. He's going to play Nigun by Bloch.
I would like to dedicate this piece to the loved ones of all the victims of this latest period of global conflict.
Thank you very much. That was beautiful. I also want to say thanks to Jack. Jack Healey has become one of my heroes. I appreciate your inspiring words today. I have the great honor of introducing another one of my heroes, Ralph Nader. I first learned of Ralph Nader just a few years ago. I felt disenchanted by much of the hollow rhetoric I was hearing from politicians. If I had listened to the mainstream media, my understanding of Ralph Nader might not have inspired much. But fortunately, I decided to go to a bookstore instead. I picked up a book called The Ralph Nader Reader that included some of the best essays and speeches he had given over his decades of public service. From car safety in the 1960s to opposition to the World Trade Organization, I found Ralph Nader's work has informed and shaped progressives, increased government responsiveness to citizens, and served as a check against the abuse of power by big business. Recently, I also had the great opportunity of seeing a new documentary featuring Ralph Nader, which I recommend everyone who hasn't seen it, called An Unreasonable Man. I think it captures in a powerful way the scope and significance of his life and legacy. I want to also mention briefly, before I forget, that Ralph Nader will be signing a couple of his books after we finish here. One of them is The Good Fight, and the other one is new. It's called The 17 Traditions. It's about his upbringing. Makes a great Mother's Day gift. So, if I were to do justice to all of Ralph Nader's accomplishments and contributions, I might take up the rest of commencement. So I'll just say one more thing, quoting from Barbara Ehrenreich, who wrote the foreword to the Ralph Nader Reader that I picked up in the bookstore a few years ago. As Americans, she writes, we like to pride ourselves on being a culture of diversity and creativity and individualism. In fact, ours is increasingly a culture of acquiescence and obedience. Now, there's a sinister, self-reinforcing quality to a culture of acquiescence and obedience. When you don't hear people talking back, when you don't see a lot of protest or not enough, or what you do see doesn't make any sense when the media is done with it, you begin to believe that nothing can be done, that this is as good as it gets. Or as Margaret Thatcher once put it in the single word, T-I-N-A, Tina, there is no alternative. Acquiescence is infectious, conformity is contagious, and if everyone goes around saying Tina, then pretty soon, Tina rules. So we have to treasure the few notable and visible dissidents we have, she continues. It's not easy work dissenting. You don't get much applause, and certainly not much airtime, and there are always plenty of pundits around to label you a buffoon or a flake. But dissenting is what Ralph Nader has been doing full-time, year-round, for roughly 4 decades now, without pulling a single punch. Today, Ralph Nader is here by invitation of a small group of students from Provo, Utah, trying to offer an alternative, trying to give voice to justice and peace rather than corruption and war. Ralph Nader answered our call. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Ralph Nader. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe, for those kind words. And I want to thank those that preceded me here, Peter Ashdown and Jack Healey, and the students who made this all possible for the class of 2007. I know that the core of the students who made this initiative numbered 25. And maybe looking back and looking at this alternative commencement as a spark, as an initiative that will lead to further expressions of conscience and action, they will be known as the BYU 25. And to listen to Eric and Ashley, their eloquence comes not just from their education and their spirit, but it comes from their authenticity. You can always detect authenticity. Rarely have I seen a broader spectrum of musicians. That alone is worth a program on soundbite television. Actually quite overwhelming. Weren't you overwhelmed? It's just hard to do it justice. I thought of my father when I heard the violin, how much he loved it. And this is exquisite. This is a real master here, we saw. And if music is a form of communication, as of course it is, Gabe really knows how to communicate, doesn't he? Every bone and muscle of his body. Well, I think this whole gathering, I've spoken to a lot of commencements. This is the first alternative commencement that I've spoken to. And what a relief. Have you ever empathized with a commencement speaker? The students can't wait for it to be over. They're agitated because they want to be done with it. They want to throw their caps in the air, hug each other, and go out into the world. And the commencement speaker is thinking of all this, of course, which is what induces brevity and all kinds of cliches. And we heard them earlier today. I would guess it was 2 parts flattery of the BYU community. That's a safe way to do a commencement speech. And 1 part homilies, which were rather sensible. The Vice President reached new heights of intellect. Like, give yourself a second chance. He needs more than that. Moral courage is what it took to bring this together on the part of the students. And it's truly remarkable the opposition they had to confront just to get a gathering together. I know half of democracy is just showing up, so I'm very glad that you all showed up. If we all showed up at marches and demonstrations and city council meetings and courtrooms and legislative hearings, things would be a lot better in this country. But moral courage, is very, very difficult. It's much more difficult than physical courage. Physical courage expresses its heroism impulsively. You rush into the burning house to rescue the child. You rush across the battlefield to save your buddies. And if you survive physical courage, you incur almost total acclaim and praise. But if you survive moral courage, you incur very often condemnation and ostracism. Moral courage, however right it may be, however just it may be, incurs a far greater aftermath of discomfort, loss of job sometimes, loss of friends, ridicule, condemnation. General George Patton once gave us a description of battlefield courage. He said, quote, "Fear plus 5 minutes," unquote. Moral courage has to endure much more than that. Sometimes not just condemnation, as some of our great martyrs in our history have bore witness to. But the fact that you have to engage in moral courage in order to make a statement of conscience or utter a statement of truth is not just a reflection of the morally courageous person. It's a reflection of a suppressive context. You have to have great moral courage to utter a statement of truth or conscience in a dictatorship, don't you? But in a free society, it shouldn't take a demonstration of courage in order to utter a statement of conscience or truth. So while we pay tribute to the students, we have to ask ourselves, what is it about their environment that led them to do this? Was it a lack of reflection on the campus? Did it touch on something my father asked me when I was 10 years old and I came home from school? And he said to me, "What did you learn today, Ralph? Did you learn to believe or did you learn to think?" I suppose I was invited to provide the controversial subtext to this gathering. I'm very inclined to engage in proper names. The Mormon Church was born from revelation, rebellion, and dissent. Some of the contemporary successors are having trouble with the First Amendment. Freedom of speech, freedom to petition, and freedom to assemble. With great gratitude to Utah Valley State College and my friend Phil Clegg, who provided the hospitality for this gathering. This gathering should have occurred on the BYU campus. The moral example that the students displayed in bringing us together perhaps will make it clear in the future the gravity of dissent, the greatness of dissent, will not be marginalized, it will be encouraged. Because in our history and the history of human beings, all common assent that led to the advancement of humanity started with dissent. Dissent is the mother of assent. King George III confronted dissent, did he not, in 1776? The slaveholders of the cotton plantations confronted dissent, did they not? The people who declared our country a democracy in the 19th century but kept women from voting, they confronted dissent, did they not? The African Americans who couldn't vote in any century until recently, they confronted a tyranny and provided dissent. All the blessings that we inherit in our country started with dissent. The dissent of the sit-down strikers in Flint, Michigan, who helped start the United Auto Workers and gave millions of workers a decent standard of living that is presently being shredded by global trade agreements, by corporate power. So why do we think dissent is always something to be suspicious of? Why? It isn't because we don't like the results. We love the results. When the farmers took on the railroads and the banks and started what probably is the greatest political reform movement in our history in 1887, they were considered wild dissenters. Oh, how we are benefiting from what they did for us. We take it for granted. Don't give it a second thought. In the 20th century, environmentalists were called dissenters. Consumer advocates were dissenters. Civil rights leaders were dissenters. Don't we know how grateful we must be for them now? Safer, healthier, hoping others will stand on their shoulders like yourself. So let's not marginalize dissent. Dissent is the fountainhead of justice. Nobody has final answers, at least not on earth. We don't have final answers. We have to have dissent. That's what the First Amendment is premised on. That's what many of our Bill of Rights are premised on. The problem is that we have taken our blessings too much for granted, and we have largely withdrawn from the civic arena. Half of us don't bother voting in presidential elections. 2/3 don't bother voting in congressional elections. It's even worse at the local level. Where's our self-respect? We've got to take government very, very personally. When our government engages in illegal violence, they're speaking in our name. They're acting in our name. When they're corrupting precious taxpayer dollars, they are acting in our name. When they are launching an unconstitutional criminal war in Iraq that has destroyed 700,000 Iraqis and 2,400 soldiers and injured many more, they're speaking for us. When they arrest thousands of people in this country without charges, imprison them without attorneys, arrest without charges, imprison them without attorneys, hold them without access to our courts. They're acting in our name. When our government engages in surveillance over Americans without court orders, a criminal felony perpetrated by the President and the Vice President and others around them, a clear violation of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. They're acting in our name. And we're entitled to begin to take it seriously and personally. When our government surrenders our government to corporate power, when half of our discretionary budget, apart from Social Security and Medicare, which are our insurance systems, half of our discretionary budget is military budget, we no longer have any major enemy. There's no more Soviet Union. Communist China is too busy converting criminal communism into criminal capitalism. They're not sending missiles here. They want our industries and our jobs. Why do we have half of our federal budget still in the military category? Because Lockheed Martin likes it that way. General Dynamics likes it that way. Boeing likes it that way. Raytheon likes it that way. You heard how few dollars when Peter was speaking. $5 for a mosquito net. I think it's a little more than that now. A malarial net. But the truth is that for about $45 to $50 billion a year, which is any normal acquisition of a corporation today, if you read the Wall Street Journal, you can provide basic nutrition for all the poor people in the world and basic public health. Why isn't that done? It's not done because the humane civic values of our society and world have been subordinated by a combination of commercial values and militaristic values. Both spell domination. Every religion in the world that I have ever studied has warned its adherents not to give too much power to the merchant or commercial interest. The reason proceeds from experience. The commercial interest is so singularly driven and motivated. That's partly why it gets a lot done. It's so singularly driven and motivated that when it confronts issues of health, safety, tolerance, access to justice, waging peace, environmental health, respect for posterity, democratic processes, clean elections, when it confronts them, it batters them, co-opts them, undermines them, destroys them, depending on the resilience of comparative societies. In the last 25 years in particular, the ravaging assault of commercial values has demonstrated a respect for no boundaries, including religious institutions, including educational institutions. The commercialization of everything is upon us. The commercialization of childhood. How many parents have had to deal with that every day? Direct marketing to little children by diabolically clever marketeers, bypassing parents, undermining parental authority, selling children things that are bad for them, getting them to nag their parents relentlessly. Junk food, junk drink, over-medication, violent toys for age 5 boys, cosmetics for girls at 5 or 6 or 7. Time Warner entertains them. Infant formula companies milks them. Drug companies drug them. McDonald's feeds them. And this is before they reach the preteen age and have to confront the addictive industries of tobacco, alcohol, and drugs. Let us speak of alternatives. There are plenty of them. We are a society with more problems than we deserve and more solutions than we apply. Are there alternatives for our energy crisis? Sure are. Simple. One is thrift, otherwise known as energy conservation. We waste 75% of our energy. In no small part because the technology we are offered, gas-guzzling motor vehicles, inefficient refrigeration, lighting, heating systems, inefficient engines and boilers, all of which produce more sales. That's the perverse incentive. If we have vehicles with 90 miles per gallon, Exxon sells less gasoline, right? So energy wasteful technologies have a marketing purpose behind them. They're not just accidents of technological history. The engineers are way ahead of the corporate executives who spend so much of their time worrying about their stock options, crooked accounting, laying off debt, inflating profits, and running their own companies into the ground the way they have with the auto companies in Michigan. We have a food crisis, not just farmers not getting an adequate price for their food. The food crisis is not due to a lack of nutrition in our society. It's due to a lack of resistance against unscrupulous food processors who are pumping into little stomachs in all kinds of ways. Fat, sugar, and salt. Staggering rates of child obesity, diabetes, predisposition to high blood pressure, and early heart disease. When are we going to resist? Dissent is resistance. $40 million people have changed their diets in the last 25 years into very healthy diets. There's still a lot of work to do. Elections. There are certain things in a society, if it purports to be a democratic society, that should never be for sale. Sanctuaries where civic values dominate, commercial values obey. Most of the social justice movements in our country have occurred because we built the civic power to tell the commercial interests, you want to stay in business, you're going to believe that you're going to obey the law, that law and order will apply to you, that you will adjust to the law banning child labor, you will adjust to the law reducing toxic pollutants, or otherwise known as silent forms of violence. You will adjust to the law that requires you to build safer cars. That's how we progressed. We subordinated commercial values to civic values and forced the commercial values to improve their content and adjust to the civil values. We have a health care crisis in our country. It really is a spectacular one when you look at the data. Over 100,000 people dying from adverse effects of medicines every year. Something like 250 people die every year in hospitals due to hospital-induced infections. Total, that went up. 80,000 die in hospitals according to Harvard School of Public Health, not counting emergency rooms, just due to medical malpractice, incompetence. 18,000 Americans die every year because they cannot afford health care. This is a pay-or-die system. How cruel is a system that in effect tells people and children, you're going to get sick, you may die because you can't afford health care? $2.2 trillion we spent on health care, 16% of our GDP. In 1965, we spent 3% of our GDP on health care. Here we are, 16%, and we have almost 50 million people without any health insurance, 20 million inadequate health insurance, and the rest fall through all kinds of cracks like exclusions, deductions, pre-existing conditions. What's our self-respect like? Where is our self-respect? How can we let a few giant HMOs and giant hospital chains and giant multinational drug companies push us around like this, disrespect us, gouge us, rip off the tax dollars that subsidize them? Alternatives? We know what the alternatives are. We have to take control of our health care, starting personally with our own health care, nutrition, exercise, refusal of addictions. I hardly have to tell you this. It's really strange, the Vice President, if you'll permit an aside. Today he praised BYU for coming in first for, what's the phrase, stone cold sober? Well, at least he recognizes such virtues. It's amazing the double standards politicians live by. We need full Medicare for everybody, allowing our free choice of doctor and hospital. We don't have that now. Promotes HMOs. Allowing our free choice in hospital. The government already pays half of the health care bill. Federal, local, state, Medicare, Medicaid. $220 billion are ripped off the public in health care computerized fraudulent bills. Those bills that we don't understand with all the codes. $220 billion a year with a B, according to the General Accounting Office of the U.S. Congress. Others think it's an understatement. That would not happen with a single payer. Doctors should be allowed to practice medicine instead of bookkeeping, bill collecting, and have their judgment compromised by giant corporate executives. The tax system, Jimmy Carter called it a disgrace to the human race. Every president denounces it, and every president presides with the Congress, making it more complex, more unfair, more unable to be changed without some fundamental civic movement. I liked this principle for taxation. We first tax what we like the least before we tax necessities and work. The idea of taxing food and clothing and household appliances and furniture and tax income from work before we tax corporate crime, before we tax gambling more, before we tax pollution, before we tax stock market speculation. A 1% sales tax on $100 trillion of derivative stock trading. Options, puts, calls, straddles. That's what it was last year. $100 trillion. A 1% tax would abolish the income tax for 99% of the American people. Alternatives. What about elections? Here's where dissent really is suppressed. We have a two-party elected dictatorship in this country. No matter the great contributions of third parties in the 19th century, you know, they spearheaded anti-slavery, women's right to vote, workers, farmers, the Greenback Party, the Liberty Party, the Populist Party. They never won a national election. What they did was they pushed the two parties, Whigs, Democrats, Republicans, the major parties, toward those great social justice frontiers that we now take for granted. Aren't we glad that there were enough voters in those 19th century years who did not go for the least of the worst between the Whigs and the Democrats on slavery or women's prohibition on their voting? Huh? Well, they didn't say, gee, you know, the Whigs aren't quite as bad as the Democrats on slavery. I think I'll go for the Whigs. They went for the anti-slavery little party. No society in the Western world obstructs voters and candidates from getting on the ballot and getting to vote as our state laws do. It's really outrageous. They should be considered constitutional crimes. Look what's happened in the last few years. Voters can't count on their votes being counted. The software for the voting machines are controlled by corporations whose executives contribute to one of the parties. And it's proprietary. Many states have no paper trail. Voting machines are distributed according to demographics of whether they're Democratic precincts or Republican, depending on who's in charge of the state government. Tens of thousands of people in Florida disenfranchised because their names happen to be identical with ex-felons who shouldn't be disenfranchised either. They've paid their price to society. Numerous states erect enormous ballot access barriers just to get on the ballot, to give more voices and choices to the American voters. That I know from personal experience. And you cannot believe the hundreds of abuses in state laws and how they are used to keep our petitioners from getting signatures, to wildly and arbitrarily invalidating tens of thousands of signatures in one state after another with no judicial recourse. Two-party elected dictatorship. They want all the voters to be theirs. That's a serious problem that invites wonderful alternatives. One is to get rid of these ballot access barriers so they're at least as low as they are in Western Europe and Canada, for starters. Second is public funding of public elections. Public elections should not be for sale. It actually can be done in a voluntary way, but there's no time to elaborate that. That's what those books are out there on the table, to elaborate those things, to show how important the family unit is, to so important how that fountainhead of civic action, when you see a lot of active citizens, which are, I can see them in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, right here. All you got to do is look in their eyes and they tell you. You say, how did you become active? Sometimes it's a tragedy like Mothers Against Drunk Driving. They lost their loved ones. Sometimes it's a teacher that had a signal impact on the student, changed the student's life. But more often than not, it's, well, my mother taught me, my father took me, my parents inspired me, my parents brought me. That's where it comes from. That's where I come from. My parents never distinguished between family values, civic values, and business practice values. They were all part of the moral life. And when reporters would wonder, how did I ever turn out this way? Like I was some sort of freak after I took on the auto industry. Boy, that really needs explanation, huh? When you lose your friends in college and high school to deaths on the highway, and you want to do something about it and get more safe cars and liberate the engineers in Detroit from their stylistic dominators, where'd this guy come from? So a reporter from Parade calls up my mother one day around 1968 and said, Mrs. Nader, I'm doing an article on your son. What makes Ralph tick? And she said, what makes you not tick? To her, it was all natural. It was a thing to do. You were a human being. If your community was better because of your efforts, your family is better off. If your business is driven by humane values, your community is better off. You feel good about yourself. You're likely to do better. So how many nice alternatives we have? We could have same-day voter registration, instant runoff voting, proportional representation, and my favorite. In our country today, you cannot vote no when you go to the polls. It took me about 24 years to realize that one. You only vote yes. I think we ought to be able to vote no to all the candidates if we don't like any of them. And I think that'll bring out a lot more voters, and it's called binding none of the above on every ballot line. No. And if it wins, it cancels that ballot line election, sends the candidates packing, orders in 30 days new elections and new candidates. Right now, if you don't like the candidates, you're told to stay home. Why should we stay home when we can vote none of the above? And there's no more humiliating defeat for a politician than to learn on election night that he or she was defeated by none of the above. There are plenty of alternatives for a better life, a better society, a better world. It starts with the supremacy of civic values rooted in spiritual values. We have to learn not how to wage war against countries that don't threaten us. We have to learn how to wage peace for all countries. Waging peace, a muscular peace. We have to look up and recognize the greatest source of environmental progress that's been available forever. It's called the sun. Solar energy in all its manifestations to replace fossil fuel nuclear power. Just think of that all over the world. Wind power, solar thermal, photovoltaics. There are plenty of alternatives. You know what the greatest alternative is? Civic action, which is the fundamental engine to apply the solutions that are on the shelf, create new ones, and apply them to the injustices, deprivations, and problems on the ground. Truly, 47 million workers who don't make a living wage in this country, defined as $10.50 an hour or less, $6, $7, $8, $9 an hour. How do those CEOs who run Walmart live with themselves, who last year made between $10,000 and $12,000 an hour every hour of the 8-hour day, 50 weeks a year, when their own workers are making $6 to $7, $8, $9 an hour? Think of that gap. There's never been a gap like that in American history. We know what the alternatives are. It's justice. Once we seek justice, alternatives proliferate in great number. Once we learn that there is no such thing as going through life respecting oneself when we know what's wrong and don't do anything about it. When I heard of what the students were doing for this gathering, look how fast they did it. Reminded me of an old Chinese proverb. To know and not to do is not to know. How many people in the administration of our universities knew for years about the student loan racket and the gouging of young graduates and did nothing about it other than take junkets, free meals, and other payola? But there were people who didn't take junkets and payola, and a lot of them were in the Department of Economics, and they knew, but they didn't do. Therefore, did they really know? Is that knowledge? Is the knowledge to help people who desperately need help, but it isn't used? Is that knowledge? Is there any integrity to that knowledge? All over our country, when we read about the scandals and the abuses and injustices, thousands of people knew, but they didn't act. Some of them were frightened. They might lose their job. They were afraid to be whistleblowers. But others had no such excuses, and they remained silent. The best definition of freedom I've ever heard, and is that a word ever tossed around abstractly? The best definition of freedom was from Marcus Cicero, the ancient Roman lawyer and orator. And he said, quote, "Freedom is participation in power," unquote. How much freedom do we have by that definition? When corporations control so much of our lives. When over 72% of the people told Business Week 7 years ago that corporations have too much control over their lives. Until we demand participation in power, our laws and our constitutions are not going to protect us. They're going to protect the violators. Laws will be instruments of oppression rather than instruments of justice. And I want to end on this very contemporary note. The White House is out of control. It's an outlaw White House. Our Constitution was violated. Our founding fathers did not want the president to decide when we were to go to war. They had enough of King George. They wanted Congress. That meant, look at their wisdom. If Congress retained the power to declare war instead of giving it to George W. Bush, they would have had public hearings. They would have had witnesses from all those ex-generals and admirals and diplomats and intelligence officials who served both Republican and Democrat administrations faithfully and loyally, who were against the war, who knew that it was a war being launched on a platform of lies, deceptions, cover-ups, fabrications. They would have been testifying. The TV would have been there. The radio would have been there. The print reporters would have been there. The senators and representatives would have been cross-examining. The truth would have prevailed. But when Congress abandoned its constitutional obligation and gave it to George W. Bush, the war was conceived in secrecy and lies and deceptions and intimidation, and the media followed supinely. And these former diplomats and generals and admirals and intelligence officials were relegated to an occasional op-ed piece or letter to the editor. You see the wisdom of keeping that war-declaring authority in the Congress. The Constitution is not complete. How could it be? How could they have that kind of foresight over 200 years ago? They had plenty of it. But now, thanks to Bush and Cheney, they have clarified the gaping holes that allow them to escape accountability. And one of the gaping holes is that the people in this country cannot take their president and vice president to court for the most outrageous, violent, boomeranging, criminal, military operations that have killed civilians and our soldiers. That is a pernicious doctrine known in legal circles as no standing to sue. We have no standing to sue. We have no standing to sue our rulers. As Republican Senator Chuck Hagel from Nebraska said the other day, we tried a monarchy once, it didn't work. The courts view suits relating to foreign affairs as political lawsuits, and they won't deal with them. They'll throw them out. Over 1,400 of our soldiers have been blown apart because month after month, for 3 or more years, the biggest military budget in the world, presided over by a president and vice president who spend endless hours flattering the soldiers, could not provide them with body armor for their bodies and Humvee armors for their vehicles. That is. In a court of law, if you are not president and vice president, immune from it, that would be criminal negligence. And a jury would convict, and the perpetrators would be imprisoned. Criminal negligence we're talking about here. They were on notice, repeated casualties. So we have to update our laws so that our political rulers become public servants in reality, not just in myth. They are our servants, they are not our masters. And to be our servants, they must be under the rule of law. I have one last alternative that I think will work. I think that any time our government is thinking of taking us to war, and they're going to initiate war, immediately all children of the president, vice president, and all members of Congress within a certain age group will be drafted. It's much too easy sending others to die, isn't it? Much too easy sending others who happen to be low-income whites, low-income blacks, and low-income Hispanics. Look at the pictures of the soldiers who come back in boxes to Dover, Delaware. When the ruling political classes become part of the risk of war, they will be much more inclined to prevent it by waging in advance peace. Go forward, class of 2007. You have a terrific launch with what your fellow students did, culminating today. Go forward, not on euphoria. Go forward, not on excitement. Go forward, not on inspiration. Go forward on the thirst for justice and peace. An intellectual thirst, a moral thirst, an ethical thirst, a self-respect thirst. A thirst born out of respect for our forebears, those who stood tall and sent us a better land. A thirst born out of our feeling for our children and grandchildren. The word posterity is not used very much anymore, but it should. And a thirst born out of our knowledge and awareness of this tormented world and how promptly we can really redirect it toward the heights of fulfilling human possibilities and preserving the planet in the process. That's the great work we have to do. It will not be launched by big corporations. It will be launched by the civic spirit, by civic institutions, by public institutions accountable to us. And when it really gets launched, the companies will jump on the bandwagon and find a way to make a profit. This Constitution of ours did not start with the phrase, "We the corporations." It started with the phrase, "We the people." You have skills, talents, energy. Because of that, you're in the top 1 or 2% of people your age in the world in health, education, and the ability to make a difference in the world because of the country you live in. There are people your age right now in the world who wonder where they're going to get the next meal and are doubled over with 40 inches of worm in their gut. But your challenge is different. Your challenge is, how do you resist having your talents and your skill and your time trivialized, however lucratively that trivialization may entail? How do you avoid trivialization? How do you avoid trivialization? I'm going to leave you with that question, because if you answer it, you've come a long way. Congratulations.
We're going to end with a prayer by Sarah Vrains, but before we do, we'd like to first give a round of applause to the graduates one more time. And also for the graduates to give a round of applause to everyone in this room who has taught them to be better citizens, which is you guys. Thank you for coming, and I hope that you felt the peace and the expansion of mind that I did, and I hope that you will go and be the people you said you would be and make your institutions be the institutions they said they would be. Thank you, and here's Sarah.
Thank you. Good night.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we're thankful for the opportunity we've had to have gathered here together this evening, and we're so grateful for the freedom of speech that we have, and we are so grateful to be able to hear these words of inspiration from these amazing people. And we ask you to please help us to have the courage to use our voices to help our brothers and sisters throughout the world that are in need. And we ask you to please help us as we part from this event this evening, that we will have the courage to proclaim peace and give love to everyone around us. And we're so grateful for these things, and we love thee, and we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.